And so today we have very special guests here, our panelists, and I'm going to do a brief introduction to each of them so that we all understand kind of their backgrounds and their expertise that they bring to this webinar today. So welcome everyone for being here. We have Deborah Dreyer from the Department of Social Development, and Deborah is the Director for Partnership Development and ICB, responsible for 3 units, namely institutional capacity building, business development, and stakeholder management. We also have Community Chest board member and in a capacity as the private philanthropy, Mike Bosazza. And Mike's retired from BOE Trust. He's now affiliated with the Net Group Trust, having spent his whole working life in the fiduciary business. He's a trustee of several trustees, which ranges from heritage to cultural and charitable work. We also have Dr. Mpho from the Schmidt Family Office, and Dr. Mpho is the head of philanthropy at the Schmidt Family Office, a boutique multi-family wealth management office based in Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and Geneva. She's responsible for managing the philanthropic portfolios of a number of high net worth families. We then would like to introduce Lesego Ndala, and he's from FNB Philanthropy. Welcome, Lesego. And Lesego is the social investment specialist at FNB Philanthropy Center. His role evolves around the development of social investment strategies, as well as M&E, monitoring and evaluation frameworks for the center and its clients. I would now like to introduce Community Chest, Craig Kensley, and Craig currently heads the efforts of the Community Chest Coalition of the Committed, building a coordinated response to the current recovery of South African civil society. Titania Fernandez from Community Chest as well, and she currently is the Director of Synergizia, Partnership and Networks at Community Chest. Welcome, Titania. Nicky Jacobs from Community Chest as well, and Nicky is currently the fundraising manager at Community Chest, who has over 12 years experience in the non-profit sector. Thank you very much for joining us, Nicky. And then our special guest, Joy Lange from St. Anne's Home. Thank you very much for joining us, Joy. Joy is the Executive Director of St. Anne's Home, which is a short-term care facility for abused, pregnant and homeless women with their children. And I would lastly like to introduce Lorenzo Davids, and Lorenzo Davids is our CEO at Community Chest, and he'll be taking this process further in terms of where do we go from here. And so welcome and thank you very much, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Ms. Martin, and welcome to everybody. Great to be with you all today. I'm looking forward to this conversation and dialogue. I pray that it's going to be engaging and lively and filled with challenging positions that we will all take in this particular dialogue. So we come out of lockdown, we come out of a space where there are a sort of new world that's confronting all of us. Is this a new lockdown? Is this a new normal that we are faced with? Is this just the old stuff all coming back at us, rushing back at us? Are NGOs surviving this? Are they doing better? Are they doing worse? Do donors understand this space? Are donors connected to this space? Where's this all going right now? What is happening in the philanthropy world? What are donors talking about? What are NGOs saying to us? That's the conversation I want to have with you, my guest this morning. And I look forward to how you're going to be engaged with. So Lesego, let's start with you. You represent, community, you represent business, you represent donors, you sort of come as the full package, literally, to the space. I want to ask you the question, what does this reset message mean for you, this sort of post-COVID-19 new normal that we sit with? What does that mean to you personally, and what do you think it should mean for us as civil society? And then the sort of space where you work in, donors and NGOs and philanthropy. Give us some of your insights.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think that what's been quite interesting for me personally is really around how when COVID was at its peak, donors were coming left, right, and center, trying to help organizations, whether it be Gift for the Givers, Food Forward South Africa, even from a first-round perspective, through the various foundations. They've created funds in order to support systemic interventions, whether it's helping the healthcare sector, helping with food security. But now that all of that has kind of died out, I think corporates are now starting to look at their social investment strategy and thinking about what exactly are we doing. And as a result, some organizations have pressed either the pause or the reset button. And by the pause button, it means that clients are no longer accepting new applications or proposals because they're not sure of what the future holds. As a result, we're now having painful conversations with new organizations to say, sorry, we can't fund you. But even within existing organizations, we're also having those conversations to say, even though you're promised funding for the next 3 to 5 years, we either have to reduce the quantum or the duration of funding. I think that CSI in South Africa is a consequence of BE legislation, and with reduced profits means that less budget is available to support nonprofit organizations.
Lesego, let me come in there and just take that issue up with you. You're saying that as things have now died down and companies are now reassessing what's happening, they can't fund new organizations, and existing funding contracts, instead of being 5 years, they may be reducing it to 1 year only. And you say that is as a consequence of reduced profits. Where does the moral obligation of corporate South Africa sit within that sort of response of yours? Where does it land that we have 2.2 million newly unemployed people, taking our unemployment rate to almost 40%, or just over 40% right now? What does corporate South Africa think about its moral obligation towards South Africa?
Well, I think that there is a strong imperative towards helping communities in which corporates reside in. And I think that now as a result, people are realizing that, oh, we can't continue business as usual. And I think that some are now really looking at their CSI strategy to say, okay, well, how can we do things differently? Some companies are thinking, well, maybe it's time for us to start having a reserve fund so that in such instances, we can dip into those reserves. But even then, I think that everyone is quite nervous. People are quite uncertain about the future. For funders that do have reserves, luckily for them, they can tap into that reservoir of funding and support where they can. But as we have seen in terms of our assets under management for our corporate clients, between June 2020 to June 2020, between June 2019 and June 2020, we've seen a 37% decrease in assets available. So I think everyone is quite wary, and as a result, people are really more focusing on what can we do to help our employees, what can we do to service the communities that we work in a way that's manageable and sustainable.
And when you say 37% decrease, you mean 37% of funds available. There's a decrease in 37% of funds available to spend.
So this would be in terms of endowments as well as reserves that foundations have put aside.
Wow, that's quite shocking. Let me go to Ms. Debbie Dreyer, who is a stalwart of government policy and understanding civil society and the issues around sustainability and capacity. Debbie, tell us, what does reset message mean for government? What is government communicating with its stakeholders about reset? What's the thoughts that dominate that discussion and the message you are giving to civil society at the moment?
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for colleagues, and thank you for everybody that's logged into this webinar. Very exciting indeed. What is government saying about reset? I think everybody thinks that government can just press a button and say reset and everything can change, but it doesn't actually work that way. I think one of the big myths, Lorenzo, is people need to understand, and civil society and our partners need to understand out there how government actually works. Where does the money come from? How is the money allocated? What kind of money is there? Where is it going to? So just quickly, this year, 2021, the Western Cape government has not stopped funding to any NGO. That's important to say. We continue funding from April. We recognize the need. We know our partners in the NGO world, and we continue to fund. We know other provinces have challenges, be that as it may. So within that funding, that contract is a 3-year contract. Every NGO knows that. It ends March 2021. And our funding policy of government, of the Western Cape government, is we put out a call for proposals every 3 years for a 3-year period. Now, a call for proposals for a 3-year period starting 2021 hasn't been put out in July. The closing dates are there. I think the only closing date that's still happening is the ECDs in November. And then we start our process of assessment. All NGOs will go into contracts as soon as we finish the assessment. And yes, people are asking us, will there be changes? I need to say, we all know that, we all know where we come from. We all know the situation we're in. We all know that money is tight. There is no extra money. The money all comes from the taxpayers. No other government department, certainly not social development, gets money from anywhere else except from the taxpayers, So people are asking, will there be more money? I am honest to say that we are in a very tight situation in the Western Cape. We are in a tight situation everywhere. There won't be extra money. We inside will have to pull tight, and everybody will have to pull tight. Our hope is that we will able to continue to fund the 2,200 NGOs that we are currently funding, but there is a message we want to put out, and it's not a reset message. It is actually a message that we've always put out, but we want to reaffirm it. We want to say financial governance, norms and standards, keeping to the different laws and compliance is very important to us. So our message to the stakeholders out there is that we'll pull tight inside first. We hope to continue funding our NGOs. Will there be more for new NGOs? We very much doubt it. We think that only in critical services.
Mr. Dreyer, if I can ask you, I mean, you do say that you haven't stopped funding, but during lockdown, we know that the message in the media was that ECDs were not funded during lockdown. Can you confirm whether they were funded or not?
The Western Cape government funded every single NGO, and the ECDs continue funding, and we ask our ECDs, although you're not open, continue feeding, and our ECDs continue feeding. Okay,
that's very, very comforting to know. Can I also just check with you? So civil society already is a hugely squeezed entity. We've got 13 million people, 11 million of them living on grants, and 13 million people that's defined as poor in this country. They are the bulk of the beneficiaries of the work of NGOs. I mean, what's your honest assessment of where the belt tightening is going to come from when that belt is already so tight?
Yeah, I've been in conversation with some captains of industry, Lorenzo, I think you were also part of it. And it's been my personal great concern what is going to happen to the NGO world. But from a government perspective, we are not going to be able to scrap more than what we're scrapping. We are still waiting to hear the finance minister's declaration, his next budget in a week or two's time, and then we will know what we will all have to sacrifice. So for me, the message that we always said, coordinate, network, work with each other, find common solutions, try and look at your cost drivers, what you're spending on, and change what you're spending on through partnerships. Beyond that, our position in our team, my team, is that we want to offer as much support to NGOs to keep them afloat, not financially, training, mentoring. Yeah, that's my that's my say, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Debbie. So we have this sort of looming and growing negative message that it's not going to go well with most in civil society over the next while. Dr. Mpho and Mr. Bosazza, I want to come to you next and just ask you, I mean, you both manage funds on behalf of private philanthropy and the interest of donors to a large degree and their philanthropic gestures towards society, those who have left money behind, those who currently give from their private wealth and wish to serve civil society. Dr. Mpho, your sense of what donors are thinking at this stage. I mean, what worries them? What's the kind of reset message they want to share with society? Are there too many NGOs? Are you thinking that NGOs should partner and collaborate more? Are there too many requests? Where are you looking towards investing your money as the manager of private philanthropy at this stage? What's that reset message for you?
So thank you very much.
We'll get Dr. Mpho first.
Okay. I'm going to just apologize for my husky voice. I am fine. If you can hear me, I hope you can. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this great conversation. Lorenzo, I think you already mentioned a few keywords there. Are there too many asks? Yes. And as somebody representing clients and indeed clients whose heart is behind their giving, the reality is that COVID hit and donor fatigue happened. It's a real thing. It really happened. There was so much to do. There was so many people in need. There were so many conversations, emails, telephone calls every single day of somebody needing some help. So yes, there was donor fatigue. However, my responsibility is to obviously take the heavy work or the heavy lifting off our clients and be able to provide them with real tangible solutions, real tangible partnerships. And I think that's what's important to always hang on to, be there a crisis or not. It's the partnerships, it's the relationships, and it's the communication. I still will always love a donor, an NGO that will contact me long beyond a grant has been made and just say hi. It's a simple thing as that, maintaining communication, maintaining relationships. So in this COVID period, it was difficult. It was difficult to, Lesego mentioned the first realities of that. Everybody, each client wanted to do something. There was those clients who, as soon as everything hit, they wanted to do something. So they burst out of the gate and they funded left, right, and center, and we had to find the right partners and everything. I won't say in our sphere, we do at least have the luxury to be able to carry on, that we didn't have to stop, but budgets did change. And I think, again, my message to my clients was, it's not just about now. It's actually about 6 months. It's actually about a year later. So not having been part of the reset conversation before, if I'm understanding correctly, yes, the reset is just to say, we've now seriously got to make long-term solutions. I don't like the idea that some of the conversations I'm having now, I was having with clients, a year ago, 2 years ago. Let's give them sustainable options. Let's give that fishing rod, right? We all know about the analogy of the fishing rod. We need people to be able to do this themselves. And this is, again, the message that I've been very clear about during this COVID. We've suddenly realized that we have created a circle of dependency. It has become deeper, it has become wider, it has become more dangerous. And sadly, it has affected the very poor and the very destitute in our country. So we certainly need to start rethinking our solutions, rethinking where, and luckily, again, in my role, Philanthropy is able to choose and be able to, really move the funds where they're needed with very little restrictions.
So what does that reset message mean? What is that for funders? You say that they're sitting down, they're rethinking. You manage masses of clients for private philanthropy, where they come to you and say, who should we invest our money with? Which NGO should we go to? But what's the mindset of the donor now? What is the reset message? You're saying you're going back inside to the drawing board, you're reorganizing priorities. What does that reorganization look like?
Well, it's simply saying, how can we better impact these communities? How can we actually start to really make tangible solutions? I think one of the biggest messages that we focused on was getting access, basic human rights, access to sanitation, all those type of things that are important for daily life. Basic human rights, need to get those sorted, to have a pandemic hit and for us to have people that could not wash their hands, for example. How can we stop that happening from the future? So it certainly was about making a real thoughtful, impactful decision about where the funds are going. But again, moving away from just the now. The reaction was good and necessary, but we need to, and we are still looking at, what's happening in the next 2 to 3 months, 6 months, 1 year.
Okay, Mike, you do very similar work to Dr. Mpho. You manage private philanthropy. You have donor interest at heart, but you also carry the work of civil society across many spectrums, very passionately and close to your heart. What do you think NGOs should be thinking and doing now to appeal to donors? What's making sense to you as a philanthropist at this point? Because a lot of things that doesn't make sense anymore. But from your perspective, managing the monies of other persons, what do you think would make sense to your clients right now? What message should NGOs be giving them?
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you. I think I'm in a slightly different position in that in many of the trusts that I'm involved in, it's defined in terms of the trust deed or the will, what we can and cannot do. What was very interesting was at the start of the pandemic was my co-trustees immediately going into panic mode and saying, we've got to feed people. That and if we don't feed people, that's a problem. Interestingly enough, it wasn't we need to feed people because if they're starving they're going to riot. It was a genuine philanthropic. We need to feed people. The way that's been reported, I think that there were success stories. There also we didn't hear as many success stories, and I know that one of the things that we need to get through is that things actually I'm not saying that things changed, but the things actually were achieved. There's I think there's a great sense of despondency about we'll never get out of this. We can't go forward. It's just going to get worse. That's the feeling I'm getting from a lot of my co-trustees. It's just hopeless. Now, part of that seems to be that we don't want to change, go into a different world. We actually want to go back to the old world. My problem is that I came from very much from a financial background, and the financial world is driven by profit. And so if philanthropy is way down on the list of priorities, what matters is profit. And if there's less profit, then you'll work on the profit motive. You don't work on anything else. Now, things are going to have to change on that score, because quite frankly, as one city councillor once said, if to the arrogant ratepayers of the city bowl, if typhoid breaks out on the Cape Flats, you will not remain unaffected. No man is an island. That's a lesson that has to be learnt, and I don't believe that corporate South Africa really understands that you can't go on expecting this profit and the vast amount of profit that we've seen in the past. That's got to change. How we change that, I believe, is going to be through the relationships that NGOs have with trustees. Paul said a very important thing. If you to hear from an NGO is a delight. I mean, not just please the beggy bowl, but hi, I'm here. How are you? Somebody actually caring about how I am. Also, it's a relationship. If you get a relationship, I think things are going to work. But if it's all going to be one-sided, on either side, it's not going to work.
So a quick question to you, because I want to pose my next question to Craig and Titania and to Nicky on the score, but a quick question to both you and Lesego and Dr. Mpho. I mean, NGOs would love to say hi, hello, but you would appreciate a hi, hello that doesn't come with an ask, right? You just want a conversation. You don't want to be asked for money every single time. I mean, is that what you feel? I mean, would you be willing for an NGO to say, hey, Lesego, I'm calling you up today just to say, how's it going, brother? Are you well? And then to put the phone down and not pressurize you for the next ask, not set you up. Because they're going to call you in the next 15 hours to make an ask, that is a relationship and not just the pressurized economy of money exchange between you. Would you value an NGO that makes contact with you?
So it's a double-edged sword. Oh, sorry. Would you like to go first, Mike?
Go ahead.
I think it's a double-edged sword, because in the one instance, we do value that interaction with NGOs, but at the same time, there's an expectation of funding. And it's always sad when you know this organization is doing amazing work, they need the funding, but the channels aren't there to be able to send the funding to the NGO. So often I find that I do welcome interactions with NGO, but at the back of my mind, I keep thinking this individual is spending so much time sending me videos, pictures, and at the same time, I can't help them. It becomes a little bit sad because, it becomes challenging for me.
Lesego, you'll get a scratch in the deep pockets of First Rand and find them some money because your heart's moved, right? Mike, you said you like the contact with NGOs?
Yes, I agree with that. You can't have it. It's a very difficult one, because the moment somebody phones me, I immediately assume you're going to ask me for money. If you didn't ask me for money, I would be surprised. I would be slightly suspicious. But we need to get to a state where, in fact, they build a relationship, so I actually know who you are. So the next time you ask me for money, I'm not sure which. I think that one of the things that the trustees have been trying to do recently is genuinely get to know the NGOs. And the NGOs that we know are the ones who are going to benefit. The ones we don't know are going to be shifted aside, simply because there is only a limited amount of money. So if I don't know you and I don't know who you are and what you're doing, and you just look at your application, you're less likely to benefit.
Paul, what is your irritation level threshold? At what point do you say that's a great call, or this is now just getting irritating?
Well, I'm a bit biased because I love chatting to people. So I love all those conversations. You know what happens for me it's happened many times. Literally, I'll get that phone call and it may be somebody that we funded 6-7 months ago, and they do call and say hi. I love those calls because guess what? I'm suddenly going to remember them again the next time I'm in a client meeting and I'm going, hang on, actually, I hadn't thought of putting you the agenda. Here we go. So I love that relationship. What it also just shows to me is that these NGOs want a real partnership. They don't just want, hi, you gave us by, or just here's proposal. They actually just want to, you know, the one who calls me and says, how are the kids? I'm like, I'm going to remember that person. And my clients trust that relationship as well, 100%. Okay. And it's beyond just the grant check. So no, I mean, when I don't sound like this, I love having conversations with all of them. It's really a part of what makes my job so exciting.
So let me just remind our viewers online that Dr. Mpho Hlalele is with the Schmidt family office. Lesego Ndala is with Philanthropy, and Mike Bosazza is a private philanthropist managing funding on behalf of other private wealth clients that he manages. And it's great to have you all online. Let me go to Craig, Kensley, Titania, Fernandez, Nicky Jacobs, and Joy Lange. Tell us, you in the NGO space, and most of you stand cross-legged between the two worlds. You work with business, you work with NGOs. What is the message, what's the reset message that you have that you want to share with donors? What do you think donors are missing? What are they not getting? Where do you think this gap lives that is perceived by NGOs very often as donors don't understand what's happening? They're not with us. They're not making sense to us right now. What's your understanding of the reset message? Let me start with Craig Kensley, and then I'm going to go to Titania, and then Nicky Jacobs and Joy Lange.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is, Mpho, I'm happy that you're okay with receiving those creepy "how are your kids" WhatsApps from me. So that's comforting on some level. But I do think, Lorenzo, that the conversation is actually beyond funding. And so we know that funding is required. So that, in a sense, is not even the conversation. The conversation is about how are we going to manage this really practical review of the social compact between funders and communities. And you've alluded to that in terms of what is the moral responsibility, what we push up against when we make those calls, when we sort of beat the streets and knock on those doors. What we push up against is the fact that the terms often pause and reset are used interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. And so I think this is a forum where we can register that in a very transparent way. So there are many funders that have said, hey, listen, we've paused. Now, the opportunity that we see is that with the funding value chain being in this deconstructed state, it gives us a particular opportunity to look at the functional elements and figure out where the reform is required. And maybe just the last statement, I'll give my colleagues an opportunity to respond, but I think it's important that we say that we cannot allow relief investment to consume all the development bandwidth, because the responsibility to build, to rethink and forecast the trajectory of civil society is equally pressing. So how in rooms like this are we going to establish and build the architecture of that balance?
Yeah. And so the question that I think Titania and Joy and Nicky, if you can add that into your responses, is that a lot of the focus now is on relief, and yet the sustainability of the sector itself is at risk, because you can feed the next 30 days or 60 days or 120 days and then eventually close your doors because the other parts of your ecosystem is falling apart. You can't pay staff anymore. You cannot fund your facility anymore because you've spent all your money on food relief. And both government and private sector and private wealth philanthropy tends to go for what is fashionable. Right now, the crisis is relief. But there are other sustainability challenges in the sector as well. Titania and Nicky and Joy, your responses?
Can I go for it?
Yeah.
So Lorenzo, just I think there's so much complexity to this conversation as well. We're coming from different stakeholder reference points, and then to find the nexus between, I think the difficult conversation still is that we're not really addressing the toxicity in the disparity of economics, right? We're talking about the economy of hope and hopelessness, and this is on both ends of different economies of scale. I think for me, one has to be mindful also that that we don't go back to or default to the 2008 recession practices, because this pandemic is what was named unprecedented. For me, in response to that, the unprecedented reset message then is around when we're given the time to think about reset. What did that mean for justice? What did that mean for a different type of reset agenda for governance? What did it mean for a reset agenda for regulatory frameworks? What does it mean for an inclusive society that goes beyond equity or diversity or inclusivity? What does it mean to give people like our homeless community a voice? Where's even voice justice? You know, so for me, it goes way beyond only representing the power that we have in our economics to make a difference. It does mean for me that we address the inequities in a very painful past, still very much entrenched in our past. So just coming back to some of the things that Craig has raised as well, and with our conversations in philanthropy, I think that that charitable and welfare responses are critical in humanitarian giving right now. I think that it is your first point of call. I'd also just want to also address that altruism is huge. It's phenomenal. It's part of our human capacity to help one another.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think to address that, also to converge that with our conversations in morality, is very critical for us as a region, as a nation, because we are known to be wonderfully generous, but we're also known to be terribly violent. So for me, the data around those two, they don't compute. So in as much as it's wonderful to be altruistic and, you know, it's possibly easier to give out of my cupboards, you know what I'm saying, than to give out of my pockets. And then for me to understand the disparity in that.
Okay.
The inequality of justice, wealth and the poverty. For me, that's a difficult conversation that possibly still must be held.
Good, thank you. Nicky Jacobs, your take on this?
Hi, thanks so much. Yeah, and I think, Mpho, I must be honest, I'm a strong believer of building relationships, nurturing the relationships, and not only knocking on the doors when money is needed, but also just saying hi, you know. And I do think, in terms of the whole reset, etc., in the sector in which we are at this stage, I do believe that there are various other trends and things that can be done in terms of changing the kind of mindset where we're at right now, or the kind of landscape that we're at. There's so many opportunities that I believe can still be tapped into in terms of, you know, for instance, marketing, social media, technology, volunteerism. I think it plays a huge role in terms of going forward and changing and telling that story, which I think at the end of the day is critical. And I think a lot of the times we find ourselves where we're going to a donor and we kind of asking for money, but, you know, at the end of the day, are we actually being real about what we're passionate about, and that realness and that story, that change making kind of feeling that we need to actually communicate to donors and those.
Okay. Great, thank you, Nicky. Joy, you run an NGO, very well-known NGO, St. Anne's Shelter for Women. Some excellent work, renowned work that you have done over the decades now as an institution. What do you feel you want to say to donors?
Well, firstly, I want to say that in terms of the relief investment and what we've just come through, that was critical, and it was critical to have at that point. We've come through that now, and we sit with a whole host of challenges as well. Understanding, as Lesego has said, that profits of corporates and companies have been reduced, budgets of philanthropists have been reduced, and that is challenging for the NGO as well. And then also I want to touch on a thing that Dr. Mpho mentioned in terms of the sustainable options that we need to look at. That goes for both parties. In terms of the NGO sector, for me, I think it's also, we're at a point where we need to look at the sustainability of ourselves and not just standing with that handout mentality. And so for us at St. Anne's, we have really looked at it a couple of years ago already, where we looked at our sustainability program in terms of days like this. And what we've done, for example, is that we've looked at a water harvesting system. We've just put in a solar system during COVID. And our charity shop, the rental student accommodation that we have. So those are all things that further sustains us on our own. But at the end of the day, as we've heard, with the relief funds to NGOs, what happened was that we looked at medical care, health care, and all of those things. But at the end of the day, the operational cost is still a challenge.
Okay.
And that for me is what I want to place with donors.
Okay. So I've listened to you now. We finished the first half an hour of this dialogue, and I must say I'm not convinced that you have a radical enough reset message for the sector. I think we are all playing it extremely safe here. And I think there's a far more radical message that needs to land in the sector from government, from business, from philanthropists, and from the NGOs. There are 2.2 million people more that joined the unemployed ranks. Next year, July, some 200,000 people will not be able to afford electricity anymore. There's going to be impact on transport. There's going to be impact on food security in this country that we've never seen before. We are facing a crisis. So I want to ask you the following question, and I'm just going to go around the room to hear what you're saying. What are we not seeing and what are we not hearing in this period? What worries you that you think we are not seeing and it's going to hit us like a speed train right in the face if we don't wake up to this thing? What is this thing that you think we as donors, as NGOs, as civil society, as government is not aware of right now? And it's there, it's either the elephant in the room or it's the elephant coming into the room, but it's going to come. What is going to hit us, do you think? What are we not seeing and not talking about? Let me start with Craig Kensley.
Lorenzo, there's this massive paradox and irony, right, in the conversations we're having, because from the one end of the room, and you can identify which comes from which, from the one end of the room, from donors in particular, we're hearing, what are you doing? We're hearing innovate. We're hearing do things differently. And when you then, from the other end, present innovation, there is a pushback in terms of saying our systems cannot accommodate this innovation. We do not know how to fund this. Our governance structures have not yet shifted and changed to be able to absorb that innovation. So that is a very real dynamic where we need to meet in the middle and actually, again, just deconstruct that. It's false messaging around the fact that you need to innovate, you need to do things differently. And when we do, there isn't a system that's able to resource that particular innovation. So that appetite for innovation and building those platforms is difficult.
Yeah, we throw innovation about like it's the latest shirt that everybody's needing to buy. But who's funding that innovation? Who's going to say, hey, if you innovate that, I'm putting my hand up to fund it.
Absolutely.
And that's not what we see really happening. Dr. Mpho, your take. What are we not seeing? What are we not aware of? And what's going to hit us?
Well, Craig, you just absolutely stole the word innovation. You really stole it, because I can tell you our clients are desperate for innovative ways. There are clients that are saying, but we've been funding for a long time. What have we really seen from that grant? What has that organization done? Why in 20 years are they still helping the same set of beneficiaries get the same thing? So I understand that it is hard for NGOs to obviously innovate in a space. And I think it's up to us as donors and our clients to assist in that process of coming up with innovative strategies. Because what will happen is that we will get a synergy of what we think innovation is, something that's going to make us comfortable to fund, but something that you need to do in your space. I mean, I love when I hear about you know, things like in Bangladesh, I don't know, there's these tricycles that are electrical, and that's the new ambulance. You know, you can go look that up. And I'm like, that is an innovative way. It's taking something that's already there. And the only comfort level is, of course, we know ambulances are needed. We know that it's going to be used for the thing it said it was going to be used for. And we can see it, we can visualize it, we can actually connect with it and align with it. So some of the biggest things that I also think we're not seeing or not focusing on is definitely the divide between all our stakeholders. And I think we will chat about this, but really there is a divide. I mean, it's great to talk to and to hear from Debbie, from government, because I will be honest, I probably never talk to government enough in my role. I never talk to them about what are the strategies that are really needed for us, for our clients to make. And that, I think that divide, unfortunately, is getting bigger, because now the pandemic has shown us that we've all got our important things to try to do. And therefore, we're not going to have the same conversations. And I think in a year's time, we still won't really know what's needed, how to do it. You know, it will still be kind of big projects that don't really affect this person, or that NGO is left behind, or a client just gives a small grant. So yeah, the divide in the connection, I think, is the scariest thing for me. It's only going to get worse, I'm afraid.
So Lesego and Mike, I want to ask you to respond similarly. Lesego, with you first. I mean, why is the only indicator, why is innovation so important? For one, because it's a buzzword, I suppose. But why is the simple indicator that my NGO or my service or my intervention or my solution is going to reduce poverty from 28 million people unemployed to 20 million people unemployed? Why are we not talking the hard numbers here? Why are we being fancy about this stuff? Oh, you got a great new ambulance design. Oh, you got a great alternate tank to store your water in. Wow, that's fantastic. But why are we not talking the hard numbers? Because poverty is stuck in this country. We're not reducing the fundamental poverty levels. And yet there's over 100 billion invested in NGOs annually. Government, some 60 billion. Private philanthropy, some 11 million. Corporate South Africa, some 8 or 9 billion. They're all billion numbers. So billions are being poured into the sector. But donors keep funding stuff that doesn't fundamentally reduce the poverty numbers. And that creates a poorer society with less money for corporate South Africa. Why is that connect not made? So you want more money, you want more buyers, you want more people to bank with you, you want more people to buy your products on the shelf, but you're funding stuff that does not result in that.
Yeah, so
What's our problem in this country?
Yeah, I think when we talk about innovation, it's such a fun word to use, because we think that's going to reduce transaction costs, it's going to eliminate poverty, it's going to reduce the way in which we do business. But I think that the way that a lot of structures are set up, be it a trust, be it some of these CSI structures, it's quite narrow in some of the things that we can do. In some instances, we speak about innovation, but what happens when you want to find an organization that's not an MPO, but it's a PTY? What are the financial implications there? So I think from a legislation perspective, there's a lot that needs to be done to unlock some of that value. But I think also at the same time, people are quite how can I say this? People are quite scared to find new innovations, because what happens if you find a new ambulance and then it turns out that 3 months down the line it breaks down? The community looks at you as somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So it becomes harder for you to try and spur new innovation, because with innovation comes risk. And if the risk is too much from a donor perspective, how then do we help that organization to mitigate against that risk? I think for me, it goes 2 ways. One, it's really around what is the risk appetite of the donor, but also what happens when your innovation doesn't have the impact that it has. People become scared to then fund the next innovation.
Okay. Mike and then Titania. And let me ask to our viewers, please, if you post your questions, ask us any question you want to ask. Even ask me to post a question for the donors, whether they'll receive an application from you. So post your questions. We're willing to take anything from you. If you're online, you want to ask a quick question, I'll read your question out and we'll put it to the panel that's here. Mike and Titania, I mean, what are we funding stuff and it's making no difference? Do you often get that feeling, or what?
Yes, I think for many years, and I go back a long time, I'm afraid, donors just gave money. The concept of actually asking for accountability, let alone actually seeing a result, a change, is relatively new. I mean, it might go back about 5 years, but that's very new for donors. For years, you simply gave money. You gave to the famous NGOs, and you just went on every year. You gave so much money to CAFTA, St. Luke's, the whole lot, all the ones that were popular. Now that people are beginning to ask for it to see results, and when you get the results, I think donors have difficulty to move. We move much slower than the NGO sector can move faster than we can. Except that, of course, I recognise that part of the problem is going to be all of the legal hoops that you've got to go through. I mean, by the time you've spent all your time trying to ensure that you've got annual financial statements and you had an AGM and that your corporate governance is in place, and I understand why these are important. You spend more time on governance than you do on actually doing something important. Now, my objection is my objection is to government rubbish, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've got a trust at the moment where we are about to lose the entire income because they require annual audited statements. We're not going to be able to create nurses because we're going to actually produce financials. The world's gone insane if that's where we're going to be. And so that's my big concern. So much money is of your income is now going into governance issues that I become desperate. So I kind of feel that we need to change that. We also need to change the concept. If I give you money, I want to see a result. So you need to account back to me. You need to tell me what you've done. I like innovative ideas, but I do want to know. And if the innovation fails, at least we've tried. But explain to me why it's failed, and explain to me honestly. Don't give me a PR exercise. Tell me honestly, we tried this and it didn't work.
Titania, Dr. Mpho and Craig, why are we not funding the fundamental data that can shift the needle, the fundamental practice that can shift the data needle towards a more positive trajectory for this country? Why are we funding the kind of pet projects, well-known brands, fancy organizations, the guys that we know, they've got all the infrastructure, but fundamentally nothing is changing in the poverty data? What do you think is the problem? Titania, Dr. Mpho and Craig.
Lorenzo, I think we, like I said earlier, I think the stuckness in statutory practices, that maybe the innovation, maybe the questions we need to ask is, how do we innovate? Not just how communities innovate. How do we innovate in our own peculiarities, in our own donor behaviors, in our own mandatory governance practices? How does that shift in a changing time? Right now, for me, it's one of the big outstanding variables is the changing climate that is going to impact on our communities, in our health, in our education, all of those things. So those implications are to expect innovation and scale and to condone statutory giving practices or grant-making practices or decision-making without shifting a change in context, then I don't know how we can expect scale if we say, well, I'm going to be neutral, or these are my normative standards on my giving behaviors or my decision makings and my donor bureaucracy. I think those things also need to be addressed, and there are certain questions that we need to pose. For instance, our team at the Community Chest, we have this resilience index, which I'm hoping that my colleague Craig will come and share more about. So we're not looking for only for your financial resources. We are coming with solutions. We are coming with a multi-stakeholder approach to say, well, let's address some of these difficult questions. Are we funding strategic intent for a whole framework? We'd like to explore those conversations with government, with private philanthropy, but it also means a new kind of education for ourselves, not only for the sector.
Dr. Mpho, Craig, and Ms. Dreyer from the Western Cape government. Dr. Mpho, what are we funding? And are we funding stuff that really make a difference in the data, not just in our fancities?
I want to believe that our clients, I'm not going to say no, I must respect our clients and say we are funding what's needed. Are we funding enough of it? No. Are we making a change really in that data in the curve for the next 5 years? Probably not. But we've got to start somewhere. You know, altruism, I think Titania mentioned it, altruism is so important, but it's also so delusional. We're not, you know, masters of this. We really don't know, you know, what are the solutions that we need. What we do want, like you said, is something sexy. We want something that looks good, looks right, and then we'll put money. But honestly, with Schmidt Family Office, I know that we are trying to move away from just the fluff. We're trying to move away, because what we're trying to really move away from is just charity. I think that's what we have definitely decided is not helpful. It hasn't helped. It hasn't solved what we need to solve. So we're looking at innovation has to be there. I'm afraid technology has to be there. And it's, again, I don't have all the answers. And I want to sit down with the NGO and come up with the innovative solution that they need to do their work. I also don't want to prescribe what they must do.
Craig and Debbie Dreyer, and I'm going to ask you the next question already. Don't respond to this one, but I'm going to take your answers to the current discussion. The next question I want to ask is: do you fundamentally believe that without an NGO, a community can approach you, poor people can approach you, and you will engage with them? That they know the answers that they want, they know the investment that they want, and not just through an NGO. But I'm going to come to that question in just a moment. Craig and Debbie, why are we not funding the stuff that's making a difference?
Because innovation and impact are in the eye of the beholder. There's an imbalance in terms of the power dynamic. And at the moment, those who control resources get to determine what is innovative, what is dynamic, and what impact looks like. And so that power dynamic informs what gets done to a large extent. That power must shift from funders to communities. And I think it speaks to your next point, Lorenzo. And then I'll come at, from a systemic point of view, I'll come at it from a corporate perspective. And what we see, which is really dangerous, is the cross-purposing of budgets, where CSI budgets, HR budgets, and marketing budgets have all but melted into one. And where that 1% net profit after tax, firstly, we really hang on to that measure and say, well, what am I going to do? This is the 1% net profit after tax I have. And there seemingly isn't the appetite to move beyond that particular scorecard. And then secondly, that insular view in terms of looking then at how we cross-purpose budgets so that in corporate South Africa, we are able to then sustain ourselves. I think once we break that, bring attention to it, shine a bright light on it. And again, I've said this often, not in an aggressive way, but call it out for what it is and say, let's have this conversation about how we shift that power dynamic.
Lesego, I'm going to ask you the question in just a moment before before Debbie Dreyer responds. Is please keep in mind, I want to ask you, why is it so important for corporate South Africa to market on the back of CSI and not stop that practice? Because it's quite irritating. But Debbie Dreyer, tell us first of all, what does government fund that they believe truly makes an impact on the poverty data? Or are they just funding NGOs because they apply?
No. I think this is an important point. Thank you, Lorenzo, for asking. Government does not fund just because NGOs apply. Government funds, and this is an important one, what the legislation says government must fund. So for every area of work, whether it's disability, whether it's older persons, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's ECDs, whether it's children, there is a legislation that we must uphold, that we have to enforce and implement, and that is unfortunately the policy position of our government here in the Western Cape. With the limited money that we have, we want to fund everything, but we got to fund first the statutory, the legislative commitments. Otherwise, people take us to court, and there's been many court cases, you know that. The one you said earlier on, Lorenzo, what is the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is right at this moment in time, there's 233,000 NGOs on the Mpho register and growing. So there's more NGOs. All the NGOs have a right to be there. They're all going to compete for the same resources. Just take that number. There's about 10% of that number Mphos in the Western Cape, 23,500, of which we fund the government with the most money, 2,200. We fund 2,200 of the 23. We fund 10%. Now, where are the other is it going and how are they managing? Most people are managing from their own pockets. They're going here, there, everywhere. What I think is the other elephant in the room is why are we not why is there not enough conversations? Where are the angels? Where are they talking? Why are they not lobbying? Why are there not more networks? Why are funders not getting together and say, let's talk together? Why are we all doing our little bit every little corner? Why are we not having more of these conversations, more accessible conversations? I invite any of the funders that's on this webinar, please come talk to us. We say innovate, but we know that we ourselves don't innovate because our money is constrained. But we want to talk partnerships. Maybe you can do this, maybe I can do that. But do we all know what is actually being funded, what is going on in the sector? And the other elephant in the room is whose impact? Who's saying what's making a difference? Who's saying what is innovative? We're not having enough conversations, colleagues. We're not. And maybe we're not talking, but maybe we're also not listening.
Yep. So thank you for that response. I want to touch on my previous question now and just ask you, I mean, we sit with these challenges within the sector. Mike Hubrecht from UNICEF asked a question earlier on. I mean, are any of you in a position as funders, Mike and Debbie and Mpho and Lesego, where when you get an application from an NGO, you then, NGO sends an application and they say, we're doing some great work in Shoshonguve or in Delft or in Blikkiesdorp or in Mitchell's Plain or in KZN somewhere. Do you ever go to that community and say to the community, you know, there's an NGO in your community that sent us an application and they want to fund X. Do you as a community agree that this is a great idea? Where's the accountability in that sort of mechanism? Do you ever check with the community whether what you are funding is a great idea for the community?
Absolutely. Can I jump in?
Yeah, come in.
Absolutely. But Lorenzo, you're right. I mean, we've had exactly this example happen where, you know, an individual came to us and said, please fund ABC. I said, okay. I found the NGO around him that could help him. But the first thing he did and I did was go and chat to everybody else in the community and say, well, Mr. X over here wants to do ABC. Is this what you need? And of course, that conversation led to yes. And of course, that conversation then led to the right NGO to support. So we have to, it's essential. We cannot be prescribing anymore. As donors, we cannot. And community individuals also have to be responsible. And not, Mr. X mustn't only want a spaza shop for himself. His spaza shop must help. And his spaza shop mustn't now compete with next door. So I'm very kind of upfront. I mean, I'm lucky to have had NGO experience. So I'm able to help a lot of the NGOs we engage with and say, listen, maybe let's do it this way. Or individuals, let's find somebody. You know, I'm not going to give, if there's 5 ECDs on one street, who's coming up with something to just put them all under one or whatever? Then there's legislation, which is terrifying, and government will put all the nuts and bolts that actually does frighten people off. But you must have the conversation.
Mike, I mean, when you fund, and I know you do nature funding, you do wildlife funding, you fund many NGOs working with poor people, you give a lot of money away to good causes. Mike, your sense of whether the community, you feel the community really knows what these NGOs are up to. Do you feel like there's a connection between, you have confidence that this NGO really, they have the backing of the community in which they do this work? Or do you think that's a gap for you?
I don't believe that that's happening at all. I quite agree with you. I think it's very important that it is done, but it's not happening. When we get an application, we'll look at the application, and if it makes sense, and particularly if we know something about it, we know the people involved, etc. But my big concern is, you know, individual private donors don't have the backing. We don't have the ability to measure. But you're quite correct. And sometimes we've looked at something and said, is this important? Certainly in things like the sector where we're fixing up, you know, water wires, etc., those sort of things. Then we go to an expert and we say, actually, is this project worthwhile? Is it going to make a difference? And very often we've consulted with the SANBI, South African National Botanical Institute, and they say it's not going to work here. or we're not. There's no point in restoring this because this it doesn't work. But that's as far as we go. We don't go to the community, and it's the community very often who can give you the correct, the better, the more detailed, and they understand better what in fact is needed.
Is FNB open to that kind of approach? Thank you, Mike. Would FNB want to listen to another party's voice in the room and not just the NGO?
Yeah, so in the case of the Philanthropy Center, what we do in terms of our rigorous due diligence is we end up doing site visits to visit the potential NGOs, but also speaking to community members to find out, is this really a need? How can we tap in with what other people are doing within the same community? Because I think that what's important is once you have an exit plan for your funding, you need to know who is going to continue to support this organization. So if it's an ECD center asking for support, our big thing is this ECD center at a level whereby DSD can support it? If not, what can we do as a center to get the northern standards from an infrastructure perspective, but also making sure that when we do leave, this need in the community is being addressed and there's broader support within the community, whether it's through the parents of the kids paying school fees now that they've seen that they've improved the infrastructure, DSD coming in with the conditional grants. I think that the importance of site visits and speaking to community members, it's so crucial because that's where you really get to know whether or not the beneficiaries are receiving the intended impact that they're supposed to be getting.
So I want to get to the practitioners in the room, Craig and Titania and Nicky and Joy, and sort of ask you sort of the question around, we discussed where money is going to go and what do you think, the problems are with this. How do we get, there's a question here about how do we get a better conversation going? How do we get a better conversation going? Cindy from ZipZap asked the question, putting people in a room where it's a non-threatening discussion, where donors don't feel like I'm going to go to this meeting and they're going to ask me for funding and I'm not going to go, and you decline all the invitations to come to meetings with NGOs because you're going to be swamped and you feel like they're all going to point a finger at you. How do we create a platform that's respectful and neutral and where decent conversations can happen? Say with respect, probably not me, but Dr. Mpho and Mike and Lesego all go to the golf course and they play golf and they hang out with people there and they hit the ball and they make a business deal, right? Why can't NGOs have that kind of access to you? Why can't they just have a chat with you and sit down and say, hey guys, we're meeting this afternoon at 5 o'clock at Bree Street. There's a coffee shop. Come and chat with us and just talk. And it's a non-threatening space. Is that too intimidating for you guys? And Craig, how can we create a neutral space where people can talk?
I'm a little biased, Lorenzo, because what I'm going to reference is something that we built at Community Chest. And I believe that the Five Horizons platform that we've built allows for that non-threatening conversation, because what it does, and I'll share a link, in the chat, just so that everybody can go along with us. But what I believe it does is it strips away a level of competitiveness and tension in terms of the fact that this is the work we're doing from a relief perspective, be that an NGO or a donor, and that fits into the Horizon 1 box, and there's the impact kind of measures relating to that. This is our work that we're doing in Horizon 4, which speaks about the reimagining and forecasting and policy reform, et cetera, et cetera. And so without going into more examples, I think it's about having a shared canvas that we agree on, and we say, let's locate our contributions within that canvas and use that to manage the conversation. In the absence of that, often, Lorenzo, I mean, I saw Cindy's comment as well, and I cringed a little bit because is it possible to initiate a neutral forum where NGOs and donors could? No, it's not without a shared agreement of how we're going to manage the conversation, and something that's pragmatic and soberly framed, so that we take our contributions, put it in its appropriate place, and then see how it comes together to meet the objectives and to address the very real development challenges there.
And Nicky? Titania?
Yeah, I think from my side, I actually completely agree with Craig, my colleague, but I also just feel that we need to be accountable to each other. We need to have and have those real conversations in a forum. That is one way that we can actually move in the direction and partner with each other, support each other, and nurture those relationships that we have. because I think at the end of the day, it's critical that we all are in this together. But the only way that we can actually move forward is by supporting each other.
But the challenge is, Titania, the challenge is that when we invite Mpho and Mike and Lesego and Debbie to coffee at a neutral venue, and we all get together and there we chat, and there's 15 other NGOs in the room, that tomorrow morning when they get to the office, there's 20 emails asking them for money. How do we respect that space, that it's simply just a neutral conversation? And we say, hey guys, you know, this is not emotional pickpocketing. This is just a decent coffee. Titania?
I think just that very fact that we need, the issue then is a conversation around dismantling defaulting behaviors, you know, as a topic. You know, let's just put the elephant on the table and understand that we are, I mean, I think our nature is our constitution suggests that we are all a dignified people, you know, so to bring our base nature to the table to say, well, it's going to be difficult. We've got a lot of toxicity to deal with, but I can see you from my own reset, you know, let me see your humanity, you know, let me listen and let me try to seek to understand also, you know. But that says we do have, I mean, we manifest, like I said, in our preferences, in our psyche, in our, just where we are in such, in where we, our implications and complications in our country. But put that on the table and understand that difficult conversations are going to have to be held, you know,
Joy,
it doesn't have to be threatening.
Joy, I mean, have you ever had a donor that you're a good friend with that you haven't asked money from?
No, you know why?
You just proved the point. You sank the public conversation.
I also just want to say that at the end of the day, it's not, for me, I have not gone and said, I need this. For me, I've always said to donors, come and have a look at what we are doing. See if this is what you want to put your money to. Because at the end of the day, there also needs to be that mutual respect that needs to exist between the two. And therefore, I like what Craig was saying in terms of the shared canvas, in terms of getting everyone into the room, so that we understand what the expectations are. And also what you said, Lorenzo, in terms of the next morning, the donor will get 20 emails asking for money. It's not about that. For me, it's about looking at what this NGO is doing and seeing whether they are fit to have the donors' money. Because NGOs, as you would know, operate within different sectors. And so donors also need to look at not brushing everyone with the same brush and looking at what is an imperative for them in terms of triple P for them as well. But at the same time, I do believe that it would work better if we do have that shared canvas that we can look at. And I think Community Chess is very well placed to be able to do that for us.
Okay. So, Nicky, you want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to also add is that as much as we don't want to, you know, go to donors and want to ask for money all the time. For me, it is critical that we nurture relationships so that if we get to a space that we're needing to actually say, you know, pick up the phone and call one of the donors, that the relationship has been nurtured in such a way that we are able to have that honest conversations with a donor.
Okay. Titania?
No, I think also for the sector to also understand that if we say, well, this is the wealth sector, this is civil society sector, that's the government with multi-stakeholder, that those conversations are intra-sectoral as well. So organize within the sector, we can facilitate that, you know, but it does mean that we take the responsibility wherever we are placed to mobilize that conversations where you are and bring that to the table.
So there was a question earlier on that somebody asked, which I wanted to reference. During COVID-19, there were several community-based NGOs that held communities together. They are not innovation wizards. They are not fantastic brands. You think of Joni Fredericks in Tafelsig. You think of others across the communities. They literally stood up and made a difference. They fed people. They made sure that there's a community fraternity that that sort of held people together and served them with the basics, with the basic stuff of food. Now, as we come to the end of COVID-19, it seems like donors are forgetting them. They kind of feel like, you know, we did all this work to hold society together. Now donors are forgetting us because they're going back to the brands. They're going back to the senior partners in philanthropy. They're going back to their favorite charities. What's happening to those NGOs? Are you willing to recognize those NGOs that really, they did the hard grind and fed people? Does that sort of resonate? Does it feature on your radar? Or is that kind of, well, it was great, but let's move on to the more serious stuff? Dr. Mpho?
It definitely, I mean, those community-based organizations for us were the lifeline. That we would not have been able to fund the right places, sectors. So I'm absolutely sure that, you know, our clients and our donors are open to carry on the work. I want us to be very careful about saying we're at the end of COVID as well, because we're not. We're at the end of the panic and the lockdown, and now we're kind of chugging back along, but we're just plunging into, as you've mentioned, higher unemployment, you know, lack of services, people just completely abandoned and forgotten. So we're really not at the end. We're actually, for me, we're kind of still at the beginning, but now it's the beginning of the hard work that needs to be done. There is no easy solution to this. I don't think I can say it enough times, but you know, our donors are not forgetting those community-based organizations. They're the ones we ran to first because we've had good partnerships with them. They're the ones we connected with first because we've known that they're going to you know, they're going to target the right people, and we will carry on going along with them.
Yeah, Lesego, I want some comment from you, and then Mike, you said during this comment part, you said that that there was this sort of almost an sort of get ready to move on, but your sense was this is going to be with us for a long time still. You have a sense that we're stuck in this pandemic for quite a while. Lesego, are you guys willing to recognize the smaller NGOs?
So often it depends on the client. I think that as you mentioned earlier, really about how corporates are using CSI to market themselves. I think it becomes a lot harder for companies to market themselves using CBOs. But we as a center are going through this process where we're having to re-educate corporates to say, well, you can't always go for the popular NGOs because sometimes they may be overfunded. Sometimes they may have more than enough support. How can you take support to other areas where there's big need? But the challenge then is especially with community-based organizations, they're often on a string-to-string budget. They often struggle to do things like monitoring, evaluation, marketing, communications, really amplifying the work that they do. So then we also have to step in to say, okay, then how can we help the CBO to market themselves to our clients? So these are the kinds of conversations we're having at the moment.
Okay, Mike, your sense? The pandemic is going to be here for a while. Are we going to keep the smaller NGOs going so that we don't lose them in the process and sort of revert back to business as usual?
I hope we won't revert back to business as usual, quite frankly. I think business as usual was revolting. I can't stand a profit-driven society. I think it's an appalling thing. If your only measure of success is how much money you've got in your back pocket, whether your own children are starving or not, is irrelevant. I think that's a repulsive society, and I hope we won't go back there. My concern is that I don't deal with individuals, I deal with trusts and states, and almost all of those are going to be governed by a deed. And the moment you involve a deed, you're going to involve, and you have tax exemption. So none of these small NGOs are going to be able to get tax exemption. All the corporate governance issues that they require, and that is appalling. So what we've got to do is try and find the bigger organizations who can support the smaller people. I mean, to me, that would be a possibility, is that if something got together and said, right, we're going to tackle this and we're going to help the smaller man, then I can support them, but I can't support the smaller man directly. That's not because I don't want to. That's because the law doesn't allow me to.
Because part of our governance structure, and I know that Debbie Dreyer does a lot of work in capacity building and institutional development, that our laws have to some degree almost made it impossible for small NGOs to get the necessary compliance issues in place to be funded by the big donors. That's a huge challenge in this country.
And when they are in place, they cost so much money.
Yeah.
It's outrageous how much, if you see how much goes in fees, in tax reporting to SARS. What's SARS? It's tax exempt. How can SARS insist that I do a tax return?
Mm.
I mean, I just want to go mad when I do these, and then it's got to be an audited financial. All the money goes in rubbish like that. Then it's not going to the people who need it, and that for me is the biggest problem. Is that I want the money to go to the people who need it, and at the moment the money is going to accountants, it's going to tax practitioners, it's going to professional trustees. It's not going to the people who need it. Sorry, I get carried away.
Mike, that's going to be our next conversation. Who's getting the money? And that's a big conversation to have. Let me close. We're coming to the end of it. We have a few minutes left. I want to ask the question from all of you. Where do you think, as a donor, and this is apart from your organization right now, just in the world of COVID-19, the sort of phases of lockdown that we've gone through, and the world that is emerging in 2021, if you had your way, where would you invest money that you think would make the kind of difference that is required? What's your sentiment? What's your sense of your reading of the trends? What are the trends you are seeing? Where do you think money should be going to, that you believe that this is a wise investment for donors and it's the most sense-making investment for communities? It's what's going to connect donors and communities in reducing the data that tells us poverty is out of control. Where would you invest money? Where do you think the trend is going, and where should money be spent to stop the carnage? Lesego.
So I think in my case, I really think that South Africa needs to think about implementing a universal income grant, and specifically looking at whether it's young people in South Africa or specific districts within the country. I think that there's only so much we can expect NGOs to do, but there's been a lot of research that has been done really around the introduction of a universal income grant, how it can lift people out of poverty and give them the dignity that they need to be able to purchase basic goods and services and make better life outcomes. How that is going to happen, it would be ideal if philanthropists and corporates could come together and finance some of the cost, because I know from a government perspective, you're looking at billions of rands. But I think that if we're really going to think about changing poverty in this country, we can't just leave it up to NGOs and CSI. There has to be a strong partnership between all sectors within South Africa to bring about systemic change.
Kensley, where would you spend money? Where's the most sense-making trend for you right now? What do you think is going to impact?
Youth unemployment at 55.9% is a massive issue, and we're hemorrhaging from that perspective. So investment in terms, it's really interesting when you look at, for example, the digital divide as well, but I'm not going to go on that rabbit hole. But looking at pragmatic, fifth industrial revolution, skills development programs. Lorenzo, you and I visited a program with the Maharishi Institute, for example, run by APSA, the cybersecurity program, where they are taking young, this is not an advert for anyone, but taking young people, exposing them to saleable skills that are going to put them on a wealth-making trajectory. And so youth unemployment, in short, is my response.
Okay. Nicky? Debbie?
I think education is key. And also, obviously, exposing, again, our youth to what is happening in other countries, getting a mentor-menteeship program going so that our youth can be exposed and have the expertise, and also obviously it would take funding, but at the end of the day, we need to actually fund our youth and with education, with knowledge, with power, because that at the end of the day is going to impact our economy.
Can I come in here, Lorenzo?
Yeah.
Through dialogues with communities is key. We can be talking, but it is on the community level that the change is going to be made in a sustainable way. So through dialogues with communities where we listen, where we empower communities with the skills to dialogue themselves, to find the root causes, what's structural, whatever is the root cause of the concerns that they have, through dialogue is where, if I had more money, I'll put it in there to lead to true community development.
Right. Dr. Mpho, and others, please come in. Joy, and I think, Mike, you need to comment as well. I'm sorry, Titania. Where would you spend money now?
For me, where the money should be going to is also skills development to enable job creation so that we can shift our communities, and especially the youth. Craig has already alluded to that, but I would want us to put our money there.
Right. Dr. Mpho?
Yeah, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon of the youth. This is, you said it's a personal wish. I want our funds to go to youth-led social ventures, high impact. They know who their people are. They're scalable. They've got that wonderful crossover between technology, entrepreneurship. It sounds like a bit of a dream, but it's happening out there, and I think South Africa needs to catch up.
Any?
Oh, you know, it's like immediate needs would mean that we still fund. We don't only just stop funding the first 4 weeks of a pandemic. We have to fund a complete, holistic, and be inclusive in how we fund as well. Because youth is one market, and there's a huge untapped potential, but so is philanthropy also. Philanthropy can fund the structural programs or whatever it is. They've beyond welfare, beyond charity. They can to fund systemic conversations even, you know. For me, that's very, very important. And then to understand that the recovery process is going to be a long term, a rebuild is going to be a long term. But for me, what is really quite painful as well is the fact that we have these ambitions for the future, but right now there are thousands, there are people on the ground, like Debbie said, Lorenzo's alluded to, these people who have brought the solutions. How do we also include that kind of contribution into our solidarity conversations? Because we can't just decide, you had 4 weeks of our time and of our investment, and we've heard you, but because there's where the solutions lie, and it is also part of our social fabric. I think that's very, very critical, to not lose focus on that at all.
Great. Let me bring this to a final set of contributions very quickly. Post-World War II, and you guys are right, post-World War II, Japan, post-World War II, Germany, South Korea, Israel, and Singapore all had massive public employment programs, public employment schemes to get people back into self-sustaining livelihoods. So there's no doubt that if we're going to change anything, it's not about a feeding scheme. It is about an employment program. There isn't a strong enough. We have the YES program. There isn't a strong enough employment scheme. And let me add this in, because the thing that Jasmine Naidu says is absolutely correct. It is about how do you generate your own income, not just going to the sector for a job, but how do you make your own money? How do you create a sustainable livelihood for yourself outside of wanting to go work for Engine or Mobile or for F&B or for some other big entity? It's about giving people the opportunity to own their own money and make it themselves. And unless we get that right, we are going to be peddling ideas and theories forever that we believe are somehow going to make a difference, and the numbers are going to be static and stay stuck where it is. The NGOs out there are struggling. 233,000 of them are struggling right now. The burden of change rests on their shoulders. And everybody is literally saying, you know, we need a more robust, more vigilant, more connected NGO sector. But it is tough for these people out there. They after the mines, before the mines, they're the largest single employer of people collectively, more than the mining industry in this country. It is a huge sector, suffering the burden of the lowest paid people in any economy in this country, in any sector of the economy in this country. If you were to say, we said what donors are going to do, but what message in closing do you have for the NGO sector? What do you want to say to your compatriots in the sector that gives them a sense of that there's a sense of belief, hope that they must hold on to? What message must NGOs get that you think you want to give to them as a closing message? Nicky Jacobs, let's start with you.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. I think for me personally, I just think that we partner together. We we speak, we tell the story more, and at the end of the day, that we don't be afraid to actually be there for each other and support each other. You know, it's critical that we actually nurture the relationships, not only with donors, but also amongst each other and in the sector. You know, let's have more conversations. Let's meet. Let's do what it takes to get to a point, because I think at the end of the day, we are all sailing in the same direction. Yeah. And that is to create an amazing impact in our economy.
Like Bosazza, what is your message to NGOs? What do you say to those struggling in the trenches today?
I think that in South Africa today, there's one thing we really need, and that is hope. I think that we are drowning in negativity. We don't believe that we're going to get out of it. And I want to say to the NGOs, you need to make me believe that there's hope. I think there is hope, but you need to sell that hope. You need to make certain that people understand that there is a way out. They're constantly telling me that there is no future, isn't going to get me anywhere. It's just going to make me want to curl up and die. I want to believe it. I want hope.
Joy Lange, thank you, Mike. Joy Lange, and then Debbie Dreyer.
Thanks, Lorenzo. From my side, for me, if we look at 2020, I've heard people say that it was the year of plenty. And the year of plenty in terms of lots of positives and lots of negatives as well. And so we're trying to balance this. But for NGOs, what I'd like to say is that if you are still around now, then don't lose the hope. Because we can do this together. And also in terms of accountability, hold yourself accountable. Look at integrity, because that is what sets you apart from another NGO. And that's real. And also for NGOs to know, because we found ourselves all scrambling at one stage, to know that there is enough of the pie to share. And if a donor doesn't want to take what you are offering, then that is fine. You will find another one, but another donor will come along. So just for me, in ending, is not just to lose hope.
Debbie, and then Dr. Mpho.
I want to echo that, yes, we are in this pandemic together. COVID is going to be a reality for us for a long time, till the vaccine comes and beyond. The consequences of COVID is going to be with us for a long time. So my message is, we're in this together. All of us, government, we're all being challenged with the same questions. So for me, let's keep talking. Let's bring more people in the conversation. Let's bring communities in the conversation. Let's get that strong social compact. Everybody's talking about the social compact. Let's make it real. Let's be ethical. Let's find value in each other. Let's say you're doing well. Let's share what we got. And most of all, I am passionate about this partnership. Come talk to us. We don't have closed doors. Let's talk to each other. We're not going to be able to give funds, but there are many other things that we can do together. Strengthen, share, support, network, all those nice words. Let's make it real.
Dr. Mpho, and then Lesego.
That was fantastic, Debbie. You took all my words. Look, NGOs, I think the biggest thing I always talk to them is stay on track. Stay on track to what your objectives and your mission is. What you're doing is valuable to the community, help, and yes, you need funds to do it, but almost forget the funding and just get the work done. The funding will come. It will come, but you've got to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. You've got to be able to have all the activities in place and have those great photos and do what you've got to be doing. Change minds, and funding will come. Keep sustainability as a long-term vision. You know, think about 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. What am I going to do now to make sure I get there? And we will get there. You know, our donors are out there. Diversify your funding base as well. Maybe pick out, talk to a few different people. You've just said it, Debbie. Network is important. Communicate and network. And we will get there. We will really get there. Funding will come.
Thank you. Lesego, and then Titania.
So from our side, I think that there are a lot of tough times ahead of us. And I think that the NGOs that are going to stand the test of time is really the ones that are reflective of the communities in which they're working with, both at executive, management, and committee level, but also that have rigorous interventions. Because I think that if you are an NGO that can prove that your intervention has impact, there's ways in which you can package the intervention that you have. For instance, let's say if you're a youth development organization offering leadership camps, if you can find a way to package that as a paid model, whether it's going to private schools and saying, hey, can we train your prefects coming into the following year? Hey, can you work and find other ways of tapping into funding? I think that the days of always expecting funding from donors, donor funding is drying up. So I think you internally have to find ways in which you can innovate and see how you can get funding in a way that's manageable. Until the economy starts growing at 3-4% every single year, the reality is NGOs, especially with what's happening in South Africa, things are just going to continue the way in which they're happening. What needs to happen is the structure of the economy needs to change. We need to have more opportunities for young people to really change their life outcomes. And I think that the role of NGOs is really to shine a spotlight on what's happening, especially from a youth perspective.
Titania, and then Craig, and then Yumna, I'm heading straight back to you.
Great. So I just want to commend the sector for mobilizing the way that they did in this part of the pandemic, but also just to have all of us be accountable to one another, because we can all bring all of this wonderful ambition to the table, but it does need the accountability from the sector, from ourselves, to say, well, what on the road to justice, where will I hold myself accountable as an active citizen, as part of this, of growing this democracy? How am I inclusive? What did I learn? And how can I improve the health system? How can I improve the economy? How can I improve our education systems? But that we all bring ourselves and our best human ability to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Craig.
I think just from my perspective, I want to end on that same innovation note, but on a practical innovation note. And so there's a time for raging against the machine, and there's a time for rebuilding. And so as a very practical example, if we look at, again, the corporate sector that's becoming more internally facing, et cetera, how do we, Mike, to your point, convert those internal resources and direct them towards the pain points in our sector that begins to unlock funding? And so there is a conversation happening, and I don't want to overspeak, with a big FSP, where we're saying that you have auditors, you have those who can sign off financials. How do we direct those resources through your through your employee volunteer programs towards civil society, so that we can unlock latent value within that particular system? So the time for building is now.
Great. And thank you, Lesego, for posting your email address there to the question from the panelists. I'm handing back to my host, Yumna Martin, who's been silent all along, but now she has a lot to say.
Myself. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. I think this is extremely inspiring. I think really asking hard questions, and I think that's where we're at right now in the sector. And I think this engagement was, I think, one of many where we look at, so where are our donors at? And I think it gave us a real nice perspective in terms of where the thinking is going. And it's a journey we're all walking together, I think, as civil society. So thank you very much for our panelists for participating. Thank you very much to Lesego, for Mike as well, for engaging with us and being open to the discussion. I think it's hard questions that were asked here today. Debbie, government side, I was looking at all the Q&As and there's lots of questions going around. So thank you very much for engaging. To the community chest staff, to Nicky, Craig and Titania, thank you very much for sharing in terms of where you've been at and the engagement that's been happening. So Lorenzo, for leading the conversation. To all of our attendees, for listening, for engaging with us. This is definitely not the end of it. I see a part 3 definitely happening. And thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.